3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody in the U.S. and around the world. Want to thank you for joining the show today. Thanks for Facebook Watch. We appreciate it. Write your comments at the bottom if you have any questions on Facebook. And thank you for all on Zoom for joining us. My name is Pete Caliendo. I'm the host of Baseball Outside the Box. Listen, Jerry DiPoto, GM of the Mariners, said, Paul is a great pitching mind with a diverse background, has exceptional understanding mechanics, as well as the balance to make evidence-based decisions. Indeed, he does. He played in college baseball, was the Cardinals minor league rehab coordinator and manager of pitching analytics, the Seattle Mariners big league pitching coach last year, and now the Braves minor league pitching coordinator. His repertoire includes understanding movement patterns along with his psychology degree and his experience of pitching rehab and prehab package that with his analytics and his background in that area, man, you got the whole package, and this brings it all together. So let me welcome our guest today, Paul Davis. How you doing, Paul?
Great. Thanks for having me, Pete.
No, are you kidding? Again, we backed this up. You know, we did a pitching thing yesterday with as you know, Dr. Fleisek from the almost escaped me, ASMI. So I thought it was great to partner up now with having a pitching coach who's been through it all, not just in the movement patterns, but in everything else that we talked about, the psychology, the prehab, the rehab. And I would think prehab is extremely important, the recovery, all those different things. So let's rock and roll with this. Let's start with, the common question right now. You've got, and I know the minor leagues may not be starting. We don't know yet, but there's going to be some minor league team that's going to have to fill into the major league club somehow, especially with pitchers. You can't just go on the roster pitchers that they have in the big leagues. So what's the big thing right now? Because I know it's going to be critical for them to ramp up. Now they're going to have some spring training. Younger kids may not have that. They may only have a week or two to get going. What are some of the key things to work on now to be prepared? So possibly, more importantly, reduce injuries, and two, be a little bit more consistent.
Well, I guess for a lot of guys, and to be honest, look, I don't have any specific information. I have no more information than what you or anyone else here can read on the internet and ESPN and anywhere else. But for anybody who was a pitcher, whether you are a pro guy or a college guy or a high school guy, you had your season cut short, or for pro guys, spring training was cut short. You were ramping into the competitive season, or you were in it, and now things were immediately shut down. There's a lot of uncertainty. High school, college guys are hoping that they get some summer work somewhere. The pro guys are hoping to have a season. So obviously you've got to try and maintain to some degree, where you were at. And, that's a tricky thing. And it's really, would have to be individualized. You see a lot of guys on Twitter, even big league guys, that are posting of themselves throwing into a net in their backyard. Mm-hmm. Some guys are in states where they've had a total lockdown and they couldn't get out. Other guys are in places where maybe you've got a buddy or two that are around, or you have a facility where the owner and you're able to get in and, throw. But there's still that uncertainty. So, to be honest, I don't know that there are any hard, fast, cut and dried answers. Guys just have to try and stay ready. And of course, at whatever level you're at, they're not going to just, organizations aren't going to say, hey, we're going to start next week and guys have to be ready to go. That won't happen. So
what's your advice? It's interesting,
but I don't know if there are any answers personally.
What's your advice? And it's interesting because, at many different ages in high school, college, and college possibly not, but in high school, as if they do get a chance to start up, what would you recommend the coaches how to start pitchers as far as games? Would you go, is it an inning or two? Is it, are you splitting it up? I mean, it's a delicate situation. Is a number of pitches? What's a recommendation there for some of the coaches?
Well, again, I think you have to follow the maxim that I have tried to follow for a long time. And this was knowing myself when I pitched, you have to understand that pitchers are liars. And I say that in a nice way, that, everybody who's a pitcher wants to get out and compete, and they want to pitch. And you have a lot of guys, I would say this to guys in spring training all the time. First couple days of spring training, the first week of spring training, you're not going to make a team. You're not going to make your season in this short period, but you could kill your season. And so I think, as things get restarted in the baseball world, I think everyone should keep that in mind, that first week or two, you're not going to make your season with that time period, but you could kill it. And some guys could kill their career if they're not smart. If you weren't able to stay where you were, and now all of a sudden you try and ramp it back up and get to 100% immediately, guys could get injured. So I think from a coaching standpoint, err on the side of conservatism, caution, and just maybe don't take everything that your pitchers say at face value. See it with your eyes, confirm it with, if you have some data, if you have TrackMan or Rapsodo, and know where a guy was beforehand, and now you see where he's at as we get started, you may have to have some tough conversations with guys and just say, look, I'm trying to be honest here and trying to help you. We need to slow it down. But on the other hand, you may have some guys that were able to do things, and you can get back a little quicker.
And we're going to get into the analytics and also the technology aspect of it, we got a few things to cover that we want to make sure we get into. One of the questions I guess I have, what I love seeing right now in baseball, especially at the major league level, and you did this, you've got a lot of young people who have got some great opportunities, some brilliant young people who are getting to the Major League Baseball, whether it's in the minor leagues as coaches, whether it's the big leagues as coaches. You did this. You played college ball, and you were able to become a Major League pitching coach. For our coaches out there, what does it take to produce or to go up higher in the different levels when it comes to coaching?
Well, I think, you just enjoy where you're at. I would think, I like to think of myself as I'm just a baseball guy like everybody else on here. And for a long time, look, when I first got out of college and I wasn't good enough and I had some arm injuries, didn't play professional baseball. I worked in the business world, but I coached baseball in the summer, and then I coached some travel ball teams. I got a chance to coach a small college team. I just loved being on a baseball field. And I think there's a lot of guys that are like that, in that, if you love being on a baseball field, you love competing, you love figuring out how to help those guys on your team be better performers, how to throw a certain pitch better, how to figure out how to get the other hitters out. There's in some ways there's, big differences in all of those things that, we can work with guys to help a pitch be better. We can work on how to actually go out and beat the other team based upon what they do, using your strengths, attacking their weaknesses, that kind of thing. So there's various ways to be an effective coach, or an effective pitching developer, I think. And you kind of have to, enjoy where you're at. When I was coaching 10 to 12-year-olds or 15 to 18-year-olds, it was a different goal than if I'm coaching minor league guys or if I'm coaching major league guys. And every guy is going to be a little bit different. That, certainly I've had the opportunity to coach some 10-year-olds who I could look at honestly and thought, this guy's going to be a really good pitcher at some point. He's going to play in college and he might have a chance to pitch professionally. Same thing with high school guys, or you look at minor league guys and you say, yeah, that's a big league guy, or a big league guy. And yes, this guy can be an all-star. Here's how that's going to have to happen. So I think, you're always trying to look at that as well. But just enjoy where you're at and enjoy, working with the guys that you have.
Well, do we have to be careful? And sometimes we get a little bit too complicated when it comes to teaching pitching, especially the movement patterns. You said throwing is throwing, and I want you to explain that. And then Mark Fuller has a question that kind of falls into this. He wants to get your advice on what are some of the absolutes of the mechanics or the movement patterns, however you want to call them.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things and again, the things that I'm going to talk about here, this is me. I want to make this clear that it's not anybody that I worked for, who I work for now. I've been on a long journey, and to be honest, a lot of it started that I was a high school kid in Central Florida, and I was young for my age. I threw 120 innings in a high school season, 35-game high school season. I pitched 120 innings. And then when I got into college, 2 years later, I started having shoulder problems. And my shoulder problems would just be chronic. I'd do a little rehab, it'd get better, then it would come back. And really, as I coached, I would kind of keep that in mind. And I was always curious, like, why did that happen? And then, obviously, as we get into the early 2000s, you have video available, and you have the internet where you can see pictures and video of other throwing athletes. And I was fortunate to meet Brent Strom and, learn from guys like Paul Nyman, take some of their ideas, and started thinking about, if you look at other throwers in the world of sport, you look at shot putters, javelin throwers, discus throwers, and you just look at other positions on the baseball diamond. There are certain things that all throwers do. The implement, okay, obviously throwing a javelin is very different from a football, which is very different from a shot put, which is very different from a baseball. But the actions of what you're going to do with your body, that how you load into your backside, how you create a stretch. And, I was listening on the podcast last night with Dr. Fleissig, and Eugene Bleecker had made some comments, asked a question about fascia. Fascia is still misunderstood, and how you create, a stretch or a load in the body. And if you look at all of those throwers, there are real strong similarities at certain points in time, and then how they release the implement. And if you think about, the other thing I mentioned in my bullet points was, the structure, the body structure of all throwers is the same. That we all have elbows, knees, shoulders, hips, a pelvis, a spine, scapulas. Again, it's going to work a little differently, but when you throw something, and there's a research article, I would encourage everyone to look this up. It's Hiroshima is the researcher's name. He's a Japanese researcher. He had a series of articles that he published in the late 2000s and 2011, where he describes that throwing, essentially he creates a model. It's fantastic. I think there's a lot to be learned from it. I've learned a lot from it. It took me a few years, to be honest, to really understand it, but how throwing violates the kinetic chain at the shoulder and the elbow. Okay, we think of the kinetic chain as going from the ground up, joint to joint to joint. Well, he lays out a very coherent argument. And when you think about the body, it makes perfect sense. The shoulder joint is a ball and socket. Okay, so the humerus rotates. The elbow joint is a hinge joint because you've got two bones, the ulna and the radius, attaching into the humerus. The elbow extends, okay? It flexes and extends. So you're going to have a combination of elbow extension and shoulder external to internal rotation in order to throw anything. Well, when you watch all throwers, you see that really what happens, and to Hiroshima's point, what you see is that elbow extension, when you rotate your rib cage and the rest of your body is on time, you see that elbow extension is happening before shoulder internal rotation. And it happens with all throwing. And so, again, my point, you can look at, you look at the size, obviously guys who are throwing a shot put, it's an extremely heavy object. Their mass is bigger. But throughout history, a lot of guys who could throw the javelin, they're taller, they look like pitchers. In fact, some teams were out trying to recruit European javelin throwers to be pitchers 15, 20 years ago. Some of the greatest pitchers throughout history were not really big guys. Yeah, they might be tall guys, 6'2", 6'3", but you see a whole lot of great pitchers who were 5'11", 6 foot, 6'1", 185, 200 pounds. It's just, it's how you, and again, to throw something, most of those throwing events, in the track and field world, they're concerned with distance, okay? It's how hard and how far can you throw something. Well, when we first start in baseball, every little kid, you're trying to throw hard and far. When you're wherever you're at on the diamond, to throw the ball across the left side of the diamond or to be an outfielder, you're going to have to throw hard and you have to throw far. You look at guys like pitchers and quarterbacks, okay, now the finesse and accuracy, really elite accuracy comes into play. But I really think that, at times we in the baseball industry, and I would include, from the youth level all the way up, we forget that pitchers are throwers first and foremost. They throw a baseball. And what does that look like? And it doesn't look a whole lot different when it's done correctly, when it's done well. It doesn't look a whole lot different than those other throwers throughout the world of sport.
Interesting enough, yesterday there was a little bit of debate, debate is always good. And I know you've talked about, analytics and video and pitch tracking. That obviously helps us understand it much better and make it more clear. Is one of the absolutes, and I don't know if you use the word absolutes, but if one of the absolutes at foot strike, I want to try to make this clear. At foot strike, when the front foot lands, is that one of the most critical areas that you have to make sure you're in a great posture, great position in order to continue the rest of the motion and to be more consistent and develop more speed and all that?
Well, okay, so this can be somewhat complex. I want to try and make this simple. The first thing I think is that we, as baseball coaches, if you go back 40, 50, 60 years ago, okay, video as we know it today did not exist. And in a lot of places, you didn't have any video. So what kind of evidence did we have when we wanted to examine or compare pitchers? We had pictures. And we were kind of at the mercy of a photographer who's there and can snap that picture. Maybe they had a high-speed shutter, and we get a picture right at foot plant. And so we would tend to think as pitching as, this mechanical endeavor, and you're trying to go from point A to B to C to D to E to F. And so honestly, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I really said to myself, I don't even want to use the word mechanics anymore. I want to think of it in terms of movement. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is, once a thrower, a baseball thrower, once a baseball player, whether you're whatever position you're at, if you're on that little dirt hump 60 feet 6 inches from the mound, or if you're a shortstop, once your hands separate, okay, the ball comes out of your glove, you don't stop, okay, until the ball is is gone until it's released. Okay, a point after that. So it's kind of like, I like to think of it in terms in you know, I got this. I think you know, this was Paul Nyman and Brent kind of came up with this. The analogy of the merry-go-round Ferris wheel on a flatbed truck. I like to think of it in terms of, you know, the body. It's like gears on a clock, and that you have to get, you know, the hips have to be moving, the shoulders are rotating, the scaps are moving. All of these things have to be in sync. The arms and legs have to be in sync. Think of a diver or a figure skater. And in fact, I would challenge anyone there. I would love to see if somebody did this, maybe some of the younger guys. If you stood up where you're at right now, and I said, jump in the air and do a 360. Tell me what your arms are gonna do. Your arms are not,
they're
you
gonna
try
go
to
out?
jump. Well, they're probably gonna go out first, and then they're
And come in.
to your body.
Yeah.
Okay? Why do the arms come in close to the body? Because you're rotating your rib cage. In order to do a 360, you've got to spin very fast. You've got to rotate. Okay, do you see divers, gymnasts, figure skaters try and stay closed with their front shoulder? No, they don't. Their scaps will work together. Their scaps go from being elevated to then they recess, they retract, okay? Because when that happens, now your arms are going to shoulders externally rotate, your elbows flex, they can come in close to your body, and now you can rotate your rib cage and your upper body fast. The same has to happen when you throw. And so, you know, if you look at those things and you understand, okay, all of these things are going on, I don't concerned, and I know I've gone around this, and now I'm gonna get back to this here. I don't get concerned with looking at exactly where a guy is when his front foot hits the ground. Now there are, and the other key thing you said was posture. Okay, if you go back to the work of Hiroshima lays this out in his model, that the posture is the key to the system. So think about posture in the spine. That when a guy's foot fully plants, look at where his spine is. Is his spine tilted forward positively towards home plate? Is it tilted, you know, if he's a right-handed pitcher, is it tilted towards first? Where the spine is going to tell us a lot about what's now going to happen to the humerus and how it's rotating in the socket and how the elbow will be able to extend. So there's a whole lot of things that happen before you get to foot plant that influence where you're at. So, you know, I hope that makes some sense to anyone listening.
Yeah, and we're going to take some questions here. Anybody has questions, let me know. I know I've got one on the screen. I'll get to it. Paul, the other part that you hear, and again, I've listened to different speakers, and some have said there's been some studies on this. You know, stride length, you know, is important in some ways. I guess I've heard the longer you stride, if you have good flexibility and strength, the more power you'll get from that. How much does that play into it?
That's a really good question. And so I would refer people to go to Randy Sullivan's Florida Baseball Ranch and read his blog. I'm not sure if he still has it up, but so Randy's a guy, I just actually met Randy about 2 months ago that we knew people who knew each other. I think we were kind of on parallel tracks with some of our thoughts on pitching. And so he was able to have this mound. It's called a Newt Force mound, which essentially, I mean, it's a engineering marvel in a lot of ways, but the whole top of the mound, a portable mound, is censored. so that it's capturing motion data. And so one of the things that he found, and this really tied into some thoughts that I had, that there are 3 planes of movement. Okay, like when I talked earlier about you need to stretch or load your body. And you see all throwers do this. All good throwers, they load their body in all 3 planes: up and down, left and right, forward and back. Okay, so what then happens, and Randy through the Newt Force Mound really confirmed this, is that you see the best pitchers that they put force down into the ground to start with. Okay, so they're going to have to put their body in a position, especially their back hip, their back leg, because pitchers throw, they go from back leg to front leg. So the pitcher has to put force down, then he has to put force back towards second. Okay, so left or right, depending upon what hand he's throwing. And then as they land on the front foot and they begin to rotate, you see some force going back behind them, okay, the forward and back. And actually, again, with posture, that you see, what you see if you were to look at the really best pitchers from a home plate view, you see their hips go behind them. Okay, their head will stay over their foot, but their hips will go back, okay? And so that sets them up in a position there so that now that they can rotate, they can create that force, and then timing is critical. Okay, that's the complex aspect of it. But that really, those things have to happen, okay? And you're able, again, with a lot of this information that we're getting throughout the baseball community now, these are things that, one, you can see, okay? And anyone, I would highly recommend. I use Huddle, the Huddle Technique app. That it's a fantastic tool. I can take my own video with it off my iPhone, or I can get high-speed video that is taken up to 1,000 frames per second, and I can import it. And now I can compare guys, and I can sit there, I can show to a guy right there on the mound. And, we could look at video beforehand. We could work with a strength coach. Strength coaches and trainers are huge in the process of developing pitchers. But you can talk with a guy like, hey, here's where you're at. This is what we want to try and do. And so I can then video him on the mound and show him, and you get instant feedback.
One of the areas that you mentioned, you talked about the head. Is the head underestimated? Because, we're talking about it has the brain inside, it has the eyes, controlling your head towards home plate. How much does that help in movement and going in that direction towards home plate, along with the vision aspect that, you're seeing your spot and throwing to that spot?
Well, I think, certainly what the head is doing, you can learn a lot from, and you can make some really, quick adjustments. But what I would caution people, or I would just throw out, is maybe try and reframe it. What is the head connected to? The head is not operating by itself. The head is connected to the spine, which is connected to the pelvis. And so, which the pelvis are connected to both legs and hips. And so, what you have going on at ground level, and then it can be reflected in the pelvis and the spine. If my spine starts, leaking forward, rushing forward, whatever term you want to use, my head's going to start going forward too fast. And again, this is throwing. You have to be able to rotate your rib cage around your spine. When you do that, when you see the very best throwers do that, it almost looks like their head is completely still. I would throw this guy out to you. Anyone, you can get on YouTube, Google Serge Grekovetsky. And there's a series of talks that Grekovetsky gave maybe 15 years ago at Harvard, talking about fascia. And, the spine is several segments, right? You have the lumbar spine, you have the thoracic spine, you have the cervical spine. And so, the cervical spine can kind of decouple from the thoracic spine in really elite throwers or in runners as well. I mean, you see, how the spine can work in running. So the head is critical, but the head's not, it's not working by itself. And to teach guys, the old teach of, well, take your head to the target.
Mm-hmm.
In my view, that's a really bad teach, because what you're going to do is the head is going to then, if the head gets out in front of the front hip, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Your arm is going to drag and you're asking for problems.
Well said. Love it. The other part is you hear about, releasing the ball later where the upper body is more tilted rather than a pitcher that's upright. And the second part, I hate to throw two at you right away, but you talk about rotation, maybe some drills or something that you can work on that rotation.
Well, okay. So drills, okay, I'll try to describe this. One of the drills that I'll use with guys, young guys, or I've done this with pro guys that, will have the problem of, getting too far forward. And I guess I should throw this out. I kind of forgot this. One of the things that Randy Sullivan has found with that Newt Force mound is that stride really is not something that we need to worry about. And a longer stride is clearly, it's not advantageous, probably disadvantageous, okay? You're not going to create as much force. And again, think about shortstops, third basemen, catchers. If a shortstop, he fields a ball in the hole on a backhand, he's got to throw a rocket across the diamond. Does he think, man, I got to make the longest stride possible? No, not at all. Does a catcher, when a catcher's got to throw a runner out at second, does he have to come up and take a long stride? No, he's not going to take a long stride. So I think stride and to be honest, I don't even like to call it stride anymore. I like to think of it again in terms of stretch. So a guy who has longer limbs, especially lower body, you may look at a guy who, and with kids, this happens all the time. Young kids, if they're still growing, they're going to have a new skeleton every year. And so limb length, especially leg, is going to determine how far of a stretch that you can manage and what's going to be best for you. So what I will do, a drill sometimes is, I will have guys stand maybe 18 inches or 2 feet from a foul line. And I will tell them that I want them to throw the ball 60 feet, 70 feet, and they can't stride past that foul line. So they're going to have an 18-inch or 2-foot stride. So if I said you're going to have to make essentially no stride, what are you going to have to do with your upper body? You're going to have to rotate. Again, it's no different than a catcher, okay? Shortstops, think about, again, a great drill. I've used this with a lot of guys. Were you a shortstop or a third baseman? Yeah, or a first baseman, okay, lefties. If a lefty was a first baseman and he's going to turn a double play, a ground ball down the first baseline, and he's going to field that ball, step on first, and now throw to second. How long is his stride going to be? Not very long. So I've taken guys and said, or right-handed guys who were a first baseman. Okay, I'm going to roll you a ground ball, field it, step on the bag, turn, and fire the ball to second. That's what you want to do on the mound. Okay, they're throwing. That guy, when he's a third baseman, a shortstop, a first baseman, a catcher, a right fielder, they think throwing. What happens so often is we take pitchers, we take guys who have good arms and we put them on that dirt hump, and now they think they have to look like a pitcher. But I'll throw this out. I'm in my bullet points, I had this. what's the one difference between pitchers and all other throwers throughout sports? Pitchers are the only guys, only
Downhill.
throwers in all of sport that have to throw downhill.
Mm-hmm.
The only ones. Anyone out there listening who's a golfer, what's the toughest shot to hit in golf? A downhill shot. Imagine if every tee on a golf course was downhill. Golf wouldn't be a whole lot of fun.
No.
Okay, it'd be even tougher than it is right now.
Yeah.
So the fact that pitchers have to throw downhill adds a magnitude of difficulty to throwing for pitchers. But again, if you think about it, if you just put a guy on the rubber and flip him a ball and say, or have him backhand a ball and say, okay, you're a third baseman or a shortstop, throw the ball across the diamond here, or you're a first baseman. That guy down there by that little thing 60 feet, 6 inches away, he's not a catcher. He's now the shortstop. Okay. So just step. I mean, I've done this. You take a guy, you give him a ball, he steps on the rubber and he turns and he throws like he's turning a double play. And you'd be amazed. Oftentimes guys will throw harder doing that than they just threw from their pitching delivery.
Interesting. Now we got a question from Carlos Munoz, and you hit on it a little bit. Basically, the difference between a pitcher and a catcher, their throwing movements. That's their arm action.
Well, yeah. So think about why do catchers have a short arm action?
Shorter stride.
Why do they have a shorter stride?
Got to get rid of it quicker.
Exactly. They don't have time. Okay. If the bases were 100 feet apart, then maybe a catcher could take a longer stride and he'd have a little longer arm action. Why do outfielders have longer arm actions than guys who play in the middle infield or, left side of the infield? You have way more time when you're throwing from the outfield. You can take a little crow hop. You've got a longer throw. Okay, outfielders have to make the longest throws, so they're going to have to get a little more of their body into it. They need more momentum. They need more time. And this is something I know, Brent was on here listening, and it's something that he and I started talking about probably 10 years ago, that oftentimes, especially with young pitchers, you see their arm go in crazy places, way up high, way behind them, or, it's slow. Well, why is that? It's probably because they have too much time, and that something that they're doing, their arms and legs aren't in sync, and that they're not, their stride is too long. Okay. So their arm has to buy time, and it's out in space. So it's going to keep climbing. It's going to keep going behind them. It's got to go somewhere. So, I think if you think of it in terms of that, and if you want to, a drill that I know a lot of guys use, pickoffs, right? Pivot pickoffs, or any form of pickoff. You watch a pitcher make a pickoff throw, especially right-handers. A lot of times that pickoff throw will look radically different than the way he throws the ball to the plate. Again, why does it look different? Because he's cutting out the time. He's not thinking about pitching. He's just thinking, I got to get the ball to first as fast as I can, or this guy's going to steal on me. And he throws a bullet over to first base. So, I would just say to the coaches out there that, want to know specific drills, if you think in terms of time, right, in synchronizing arms and legs, you can come up with all kinds of drills on your own. Like me thinking like, okay, I'm going to make this guy, I'm going to put the foul line right in front of him and tell him he can't stride past it. that was just me having a guy who was extremely long, out of time, out of rhythm. Like, okay, hey, let's just force this guy to cut the time and see if he can adjust. And you know what? Most kids, if you do that, if you force them and say, okay, you can't stride past, this mark that's 18 inches or 2 feet, they're going to go way past it to start with, way past it, because it'll feel so foreign. And then they start working back, trial and error, and their body will make an adjustment.
Let's make a quick announcement here. Brent Strom will be on Monday at 1 p.m. Central Time, in case you want to write a note on that also. Man, he's on a lot of these shows just listening. Just gives you an idea. Paul was on last night, how much these guys are just constant learners. They've been in it a while and study it and teach a lot of people yet, but they're always listening. Let's take another question. Here Dirk Kenny asked, is it possible for a pitcher that doesn't create force to improve drastically? How big of an overhaul do you have to do to the delivery to create this?
Really good question. And I think, so I said it's important to create force. So you have to get force down, then back towards second. What happens, I think, in timing, this is something too that Randy Sullivan has shown. He's verified it. The amount of time that you create force. Most guys are going to put force down into the ground, but a lot of times it's just not long enough. Okay. And what they start doing is they start pushing back, pushing off the rubber. They're pushing back towards second too early. And so if you were to look at guys, there's a lot of people have written about this in various places now, the vertical shin angle. Okay. That if you look at a pitcher's back leg and from the top of his leg lift or, wherever he kind of gathers himself, and you were to just look at from ankle to knee, all right, and just draw a line there on video. How vertical is that? How long can he keep that shin vertical? Most guys, even in professional baseball, do not keep that shin vertical long enough. Okay, so the knee you see start going towards home or it goes towards third. So this is a three-dimensional thing. So if the knee starts going towards third or home, now what's happening to my back hip and my pelvis? I'm not going to be able to get a big enough load, a big enough stretch in order to use my body as efficiently as I can possibly. Okay. So I think that's one thing that you can look at. Now, there's a lot of guys too, and I think back to myself and other guys, kids that I've worked with. There's a lot of basketball players that can create a tremendous amount of force down into the ground and jump extremely high. Okay. I've seen guys with 32, 34, 36-inch verticals that can't throw at all. Okay. Or I've seen some pitchers who they've got a 34-inch vertical and they're stuck at 85 miles an hour. So, and just, we can all think about and have a little chuckle about the number of NBA players who've gone out to throw a first pitch and can't throw. Okay. But those guys can jump out of the gym. They can produce tremendous amounts of force down. Maybe they don't produce the same amount of force laterally, although you could look at a lot of those guys and you could say, wow, they're quick as heck. So they can produce the force laterally, but now it's the timing, okay? And timing is critical. So throwing is complex. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's complex, just like hitting is, that you can see guys, who are not very big, but they can throw a baseball hard. Mike Leake is 5'11", 175 pounds. He can still throw the ball 90 miles an hour. He's a really good golfer. He's a tremendous athlete. He can hit. His timing is exceptional. Okay. And it doesn't, and that's, one of the things, another thing that Randy has found out is that, to be honest, after about 180 pounds, weight doesn't matter. And really, when you get beyond, say, 225 in a pitcher, you're probably making things more complicated. Throughout history, again, we've seen a lot of great Hall of Fame pitchers that probably were in that 180 to 225 range. They weren't exceptionally big guys, but their timing was incredible, and that allowed them to throw hard.
Paul, this goes to Jen's question here. It's a broad question. Her question is basically for, exercises, but a broad question of the major thing nowadays, everybody's concerned about hurting a pitcher. So what are some of the major things to work on to help prevent injuries? We know it's an unknown in a lot of ways that you're going to have injuries sometimes, even when you do the best of things. But what are some of the things to work on to prevent injuries?
Well, here's one thing that I would just throw out, and I've said this for probably 7-8 years. And if I could go back in time with my two sons, and one of them was a better baseball player than the other, bigger guy, and he probably got my genes to be able to throw a little bit, and my other son got my wife's genes, who was a great athlete, but she can't throw. Which that's a whole another point that. Again, I would just throw out, my wife was a all-conference volleyball player, all-conference basketball player. She was a state champion in the 400 meters. So she could run and jump, but she couldn't throw. She can't throw, okay? And again, you see a whole lot of NBA guys who are great athletes, but can't throw. You see guys in the NFL that are wide receivers and defensive backs, great athletes, can't throw. Think back in history, and you look at, a friend of mine had sent this to me a couple years ago. Another guy who I've learned a lot from, Lloyd Lee, and he's a CPA in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and he's incredibly brilliant when it comes to throwing and pitching. And through a friend of his, they'd found a old copy of this book that Bob Feller wrote in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, and Feller described his training regimen. It was all about calisthenics, okay? Guys back in those days in the 50s and 60s, early 70s, think back to Steve Carlton, okay? They didn't lift weights. And what I was going to say was what I would have my sons do if I had young kids right now, I would get them involved in either martial arts, gymnastics, or ballet, maybe all three. And if you think about it, if you want to get in great throwing or hitting shape, do those things. Do Pilates type work, yoga aspects. What is Tom Brady doing right now as he ages? And what has he said he's doing? He doesn't lift weights. He does strengthening work. It's a lot of band work. I'm not gonna be a shill for the TB12 method. I've never really done it, but the point is that when you understand that it's elasticity of the body that is critical. So we've all coached guys, and again, you think about athleticism, and we think of fast twitch, right? You watch somebody swing a golf club, throw a baseball, jump, shoot a basketball. You say, oh, that's athletic. Well, we're thinking what we see, what our mind sees and recognizes that as athleticism is rhythm, timing, coordination. And so the faster you can do those things, the more elite you become. PGA Tour golfers swing the club head at 120 miles an hour. Well, we look at them and we say, oh man, they're so fluid, they're smooth. They're really fast. Major league pitchers are throwing 95 miles an hour. Their shoulder is internally rotating at 7,500 degrees per second. they're extending their elbow at 3,600 degrees per second. They're rotating their pelvis and their rib cage at incredible speeds. But yet, we tend to tell younger kids, oh, you got to slow down. No, you have to create rhythm, timing, coordination. There has to be an elasticity in the body in order to do that throughout the whole body. You know, if your pelvis is out of whack, you know, if it's tilted one way or the other, okay, that's going to affect some part of your spine. And that's where, again, if you have, I'm fortunate, you know, as a professional baseball coach, I can have conversations with trainers who are really knowledgeable and understand the body to a much higher degree than I do, and that I may see something in a pitcher and I can go and ask, like, hey, what's going on, you know, with this guy's pelvis, or, you know, with his scap, or, you know, whatever, and we can work on it collaboratively. So, you know, getting to know, I mean, I would recommend to people out there, get to know a guy, you know, who's a PT or a certified trainer who's really knowledgeable and can help you, because they'll be worth your weight in gold, you know, to be able to collaborate with those guys.
Paul, this may not be an easy one but it's a good question. You know, in high school, Brett Fuller asked, you know, you have pitchers and then you have pitchers who play positions. What's a throwing routine look like when you have those type of players where you just can't place the pitchers in one area?
That's always a tough question. And I think, you know, as a coach, you know, look, there are no real hard and fast answers. I think, you know, I dealt with this when I coached younger guys, travel teams, high school teams, even in college, you know, at the small college level. I always had a couple guys who were position players and also are going to pitch. And so, you know, I think, you know, certainly, you know, one of the things I did one year, I had a guy who at the small college I coached at, he'd been a shortstop. And we said, okay, you're going to have to be one of our better pitchers. There's no way you can play shortstop and pitch. So we're going to move you to second. You know, so we did that. The next year, his senior year, he was our closer and he needed to play third for us. So he could handle playing third base and then coming in and closing twice a week, maybe. You know, we tried not to use him back to back. I think you have to really understand, you know, some general things like how old are the kids, what's their physical level of maturity. You know, some kids are going to be more physically mature than others. You know, the kid who's the mesomorph, who's 15 years old and he's already shaving and his body's not going to change much, versus the 15-year-old kid who's the 6'2", 145-pound beanpole and is, you know, a long way from shaving. You just have to kind of adjust, I think, and, you know, get to know your guys. You gotta create conversations with them and ask how they feel, and just try and do the best you can to not overuse them. Obviously, in high school, you can use a DH. So there's going to be days where if he's one of your better hitters, you DH him the day after he pitches. You know, it's a tough one. It really is.
And here's one I battle with. 37 years, I'm still battling with it. And I realize again another general question, but when you're working with a pitcher, and are you doing it in sequence, or are you identifying through video and other things what some of the issues are, and then working on those specific issues, you know, through different matters? There's different ways of doing it, because some people just take it, you know, like a cookie cutter, step at a time, and then make the corrections. How do you do that?
Well, I think, you know, this kind of goes to back to that last question. I think one of the things you have to do with high school kids is, if you have a, you know, fairly good understanding of their delivery, you know, if a guy, you know, this is where you would need to look at some video and, you know, have a little understanding of, you know, where his spine is, what position is his arm in when he's accelerating, and what's his deceleration look like? If you've got that guy who's a position player, maybe he is a first baseman, not a great thrower. You're going to have to make some adjustments. But say the guy who's at shortstop, who's got really good arm action, and one of the ways you can tell this too is take guys and have them throw the ball. What kind of backspin do they get on it? What kind of tilt, what kind of axis? The best throwers have always been the guys that can backspin the baseball. Whether you're playing shortstop, right field, third base, catcher, those are the best throwers. Okay, the ball will tell us a lot about how a guy is throwing. Okay, so I think then if you look at what am I going to have to do, in order to get that guy there, I am becoming much more convinced. I will say this: the longer I've looked at this, and in fact, I was playing around last night. Just a thought came to mind after the conversation with Dr. Fleissig, and kind of looking at what I like to call the hinge position. And Randy Sullivan is using this term also. That you see this in really, really good throwers, okay, and good hitters, that back hip hinges. And if you look at where the position of guys' back hip, and even where their front leg is, when their hands separate, okay? Because again, once my hands separate, everything has to go continuously. And if I'm in a bad position, it may be slower, it may be more inefficient, but if I can get in a good position, in a really solid hinged position where my pelvis is in a good spot, okay, now I can go forward and things will kind of fall into place. Now, that being said, there are certain things where I think, you may be able to identify that, look, this guy does everything pretty well, but until his foot hits the ground, now he goes forward too much. Okay, he's not able to continue rotation. Some of that could be, well, maybe his obliques aren't very strong. And in fact, one of the things I think that you can see a lot of times in young kids, again, the beanpole kids, I was probably like this. I mean, look, I was 6'1", 160 pounds until I was 16 years old. And so you don't have much in the way of obliques. So I would go back to, strengthening and stretching, do core work that is going to really strengthen the oblique and the whole core system, if you will. Things like gymnastics do that. Martial arts do that. Even ballet. I mean, look at ballet dancers, the positions that they get their body into. It's beautiful. And they have to be incredibly strong to do that. So, I think if you can identify, so I like to call it now just hinge, ride, rotate. You're hinge there, you ride your pelvis, and now you have to rotate into foot plant. It's three things, and that's all I'm trying to look at.
And, and then Jen asks, the trunk lower back flexibility is as important just as well, being flexible in those areas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to be strong, but you also have to be elastic. I mean, the whole trunk, you think about, and this is something from the world of fascia, that there's, fascial connection from, it crosses, right? We think, the cross from the left hip to the right shoulder and vice versa. So, and that, goes into the scaps. I think a lot of kids, just pitchers, throwers in general, they neglect their backside. So, doing things that can strengthen the whole posterior chain are certainly really good. You don't have to lift massive amounts of weight to do that. Even whether it's isometric stuff. And again, this is where, if you know a good PT, a good athletic trainer, you go find someone who's a Pilates trainer or a ballet teacher. I think they could help you quite a bit.
You know, Terry Ayers asks, and he's an ABC Hall of Fame coach. He asks, and I'm paraphrasing, you know, when we're talking about, let's go to the big leagues right now, and we can kind of tailor it to maybe even high school and college. Talking about starting pitcher that's going, and we understanding that we're dealing with individuals nowadays also. Understand after a pitcher's done pitching, what's a typical routine? What's a good routine or even a typical routine the next few days before you pitch again in your fourth or fifth day?
Well, you know, it is individualized. And, you know, this was on the talk last night with Dr. Fleissig about ice.
Yeah.
You know, that's the first one. Look, some guys like to ice, some guys don't. And there's various, you know, a lot of studies going on, whether it works or doesn't work. You know, you see certain guys now with I forget the name of it, but, you know, the compression training, if you will. You know, it's the long band that you know, you can compress the arm. You know, guys like that. Some guys do like to still run. You don't see a whole lot of distance running done anymore. There are some guys that will do it. Some guys want to go run sprints. You know, some guys are going to really get in and do a lot of foam rolling. Some guys will do stretching, you know, Pilates, yoga type aspect. Some guys do like to lift, you know, whatever their routine is. You know, for me, I think the biggest thing is that the best starting pitchers have a routine. Now, they're getting paid hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And so for 6 months, they can basically say, okay, every 5 days, I'm pitching in a game. And I'm going to throw roughly 100 pitches. And on the first, second, third, the next 4 days, I know exactly what I'm going to do. Some guys have it mapped out to the minute for the next 4 days, practically. Especially at least, you know, in that time frame that they come into the clubhouse and now, you know they go get a massage, or they're going to go work with the strength coach, you know, whatever it may be, whether it's first day, second day. You know, okay, when are they going to throw their side? Some guys like to take 1 day off, then throw a side. Some guys like to take 2 days off. You know, as the season goes on, some guys that normally will be a 1 day off, throw a side, they push back to 2. Or if, you know, you got an off day in there, and so maybe they're going to have 5 days between. But I think the biggest thing is to find a routine, because you know, I heard this from Ken Ravizza, probably 25 years ago. The late Ken Ravizza, who you know, his book Heads Up Baseball is still kind of, it's a Bible for me that I refer to. And he had worked with Augie Garrido at Cal State Fullerton a lot. And Ravizza said Garrido liked to talk about routines and frame them to his players as it's something to go to when you need to go to it. And good starting pitchers create that routine so that they can go to it, so that, you know, they're creatures of habit. You know, look, they're throwing every 5 days. They want to be comfortable. They want to just do things in an orderly manner. So, you know, I hope that answers the question, but I think there's a lot of things. I mean, like those of you out there who play golf, you know, for me, I like to go hit golf balls before I play. You know, if I can go hit balls for 30 minutes and I know, okay, here's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start this part of my bag and I'm going to work my way up. It puts me in a better frame of mind that if I know, okay, I went and hit balls for 20 minutes and, you know, the last 4 swings were with my driver, and I striped him. Okay, I'm ready to go to the first tee and hit my drive right down the middle. It's the same for pitchers.
Paul, do a lot of big league pitchers, after they're done throwing, do most of them play at least a little catch the next day, or do they do something else?
Well, I think, again, that depends.
Individual?
Some guys, some veteran guys who are pretty disciplined and have their routine, they know, you know what, I'm not even going to pick a ball up. Other guys will go out and, they just play a little catch. 60 feet, 70 feet, something like that, just nice and easy, just to kind of get the blood flowing. Some guys just say, I want to feel the baseball every day. There are some guys, and, Brent can attest to this, that off day be damned. If it's their day to throw or do whatever part of their routine, they are going to do it. Come hell or high water, no ifs, ands, or buts. And that's part of what makes them great.
And what about is there a uniqueness to the relief pitchers? Because again, they may have to pitch the next day. What are they doing after the day? They pitch one day, maybe they'll come back the next. Are they doing something in between there or after the game?
Yeah. So, a lot of relievers, certainly if you're a veteran guy, you're an established guy, and you're what I would call an up game pitcher, that you're one of the 5 guys in the pen that, hey, if we're winning the game in the 6th inning, there's a good chance that you're pitching. And teams have their 7th inning guy, their 8th inning, their closer. Those guys have their routine that if they pitch, okay, they go into the training room right after. They're going to get worked on by the trainer, or they may go in and they ride a bike. A lot of times those guys are going to do it right after the game. Whatever they need to do. And if they don't pitch, they'll have a similar routine, just may not be, from a recovery standpoint, is geared towards that as much. And then, you have conversations. Those guys, look, a lot of teams, they don't, you'd like to not to have to pitch your relievers 3 days in a row. It happens sometimes. And, sometimes you're just going to have conversations with the guys and say, hey, how you feeling? We're going to try and stay away from you, but, we may have to pitch you. Or there are times where teams are going to just say, you're off limits today. You hear managers say this all the time in post-game press conferences. Look, we were giving so-and-so a day off. So, this guy was going to be our closer, or this guy was our setup guy. Look, relievers, it's different. Big league starters are gearing themselves to throw 200 innings. Okay? I know it doesn't happen anymore, but I don't think there's a starter worth his salt who isn't thinking, I'm going to pitch 200 innings this year. That's their goal. So they condition that way. I think most really good relievers are saying to themselves, I want to be able to pitch every other day, or 80 times throughout a big league season. If I can, that's what I'm conditioning myself for. So, it's a little bit of a distance runner versus a sprinter, and that's how they're gonna train. So I want to answer this question that I see here that Jennifer.
Yeah, and I was just going to get to that. Go ahead.
Well, what about kids throwing every day?
Mm-hmm.
So here's a question that I would just throw out. And I think, this gets to the notion of, again, throwing is throwing, and thinking about how do we develop really good throwers? Where is a part of the world where there have been a tremendous number of baseball players who signed professional contracts at a really young age?
Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Curacao is number 1 as far as per capita.
Yeah. Kids in Latin America.
Yeah.
They throw a lot. And if you go back to the old days, okay, and I can think back to even when I was a kid, when you still did this, And you would go to the local Little League field or park that had a backstop, and you'd play in your backyard. And whether it's 3-on-3 or 4-on-4 or however many kids, there's no umpires, there's no parents, there's no fans or anything. And sometimes maybe you have catcher's gear, maybe you don't. Maybe you would use wiffle balls or whatever, but you'd throw all the time. I mean, I grew up in Central Florida and I played baseball a lot, not organized, but just in my backyard. Or I happen to live 2 blocks from the local Little League field. So we'd go there a lot. If my arm was sore, what do you think I did?
Stop.
I didn't throw. So it's the same. You see this in places where kids have the ability to throw every day. Okay, they'll go out and they'll play, but for the most part, I mean, the human body wants to avoid pain. So if my arm is sore and I'm 12, I'm going to say to my buddies, I don't want to pitch today. You be the pitcher. Okay. So that's what kids do. And you think of it, you think of anything, right? I mean, those kids we see, I mean, as an industry, we go to the Dominican all the time and we sign kids at a young age. Baseball is a way of life there. They grow up, they model, they're watching older, if you're a 5-6-year-old kid, you have an older brother or cousin or friends, relatives who play, you may see them. That's your model. You want to be a baseball player. Okay. You look at guys who are major league players, those are your models. And so they throw. Now they're in a climate where they can do that all the time. And so their body adapts. They become good throwers because they throw a lot. Now, not every single Dominican kid gets signed. It's just like anything else. And I think back to Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson. Both of their fathers were very good amateur golfers. And they both learned by their fathers sitting them in a high chair in front of them in their garage, hitting golf balls into a net. And they learned by watching. Phil Mickelson became a left-handed swinger because, think of it, if I'm sitting here and I'm watching you, I'm sitting in a high chair and I'm watching you swing right-handed, it's left-handed for me. Okay? Tiger's father had to kind of mitigate that, and he turned some things around, and Tiger ended up being a right-handed swinger. But so my point with that is, sure, kids can throw every day. We go back eons ago. If all I had was a rock to kill my food, I'm going to go out and throw every day. And I'm going to adapt how I throw in order to probably not feel discomfort. If I do feel pain, my brain is probably going to say, oh, you know what? I better do something different. If I have to throw a spear to kill my food, I'm going to throw every day. So, it doesn't have to be with maximum intensity, but they throw. And even if you think about, as kids, look, we all tried to, when we were 7, 8 years old and you were going out, it's like, hey, who can throw the ball the farthest? Or with footballs, you certainly would do that. Like, hey, back up, I can throw it farther than that. So just allowing kids the freedom to throw, in some ways, I think that's missing from the developmental aspect that we have today. That we want to make everything scientific, and we want to coach people immediately. I don't know that it's necessary all the time.
I'm glad we addressed that. Folks, we got about 5 minutes left. I want to definitely thank Paul. Paul, that topic there about the throwing aspect, I think sometimes we also make a mistake. I believe with young kids, that, they don't play multiple sports, which again takes away their athleticism. You see that a lot with travel teams that are starting at 10 years old. And I know travel teams, that's all they do is play baseball all year round at 10 years old. And science has shown that that is definitely not good for you. That could be a whole topic. But the other part is sometimes I think we make the misunderstanding that kids should play catch a lot all the time and throw, but we have to be careful of the pitching aspect, because you look at the big league guys, nobody really pitches 3 days in a row, but yet I've seen young kids being thrown in games 3 days in a row at 12 years old, at 13, at 14. So we got to be cautious there also, correct?
Yeah, but again, back to my point that I think if, and I argued this probably about 20 years ago, if there were no fans in the stands, if there were no parents involved, no adults involved, okay? If kids could just show up throughout, wherever you are, whether it's in warm weather climates where you could play baseball year round, or, in Omaha, Nebraska, where I live right now, whether it's from April to September, if kids could just go play, I think you'd find that things would be a little bit different. That they'd kind of monitor themselves. Now, the kids who really want to play, okay, I guarantee you that most guys who are in the big leagues, if you ask them, I mean, look, one of the things is, people can say, well, it's 162 games, it's a grind. Yeah, the travel is the grind. Guys love to play. Most people who love baseball and who are good at it, from an early age, if you told them that you could play every single day, sign me up. I want to do that. That they're out there. I mean, look, I was that kid that was constantly, I grew up in a little neighborhood. There were some other boys. I was the guy that was pestering my buddies, like, hey, let's go play. Let's go down to the park. No, there's something else they want to do. Well, again, back to the elite athletes, I think elite athletes, one, their mindset is they love to compete. Two, they want to play. Okay, that's ultimately, and that's the other thing too, that I would throw this out. Competitive sport at its root is play. There are times where as a coach, especially with younger kids, and even when I coached college guys, we'd have a day probably once the season started, even, once every 3 weeks or so, whether we did it outdoors or indoors, if the weather was crappy, we'd play a wiffle ball game. I just say, okay, we're not practicing today. It's wiffle ball day.
All right.
We're having fun. Just running around barefoot in the outfield, throw down some bases. Let's have fun. Let's play. Okay. Here, we got our wiffle ball, create the craziest pitches you can. Pick teams. Okay, guys are trash talking. And that's important, to give kids the ability to just play and have fun and experiment on their own.
Love it. Great job. Let's end it with this question. I think it'd be a good question. This could be a whole topic also. With Kevin Kohlenberg, who actually played in Belgium for me on a national team there, and lives in the States now, coaching in the States. What's the minimum age to start throwing a curveball or sliders? There are a lot of discussions. What's your opinion on this? This is a big topic.
Well, Barry Zito said he started throwing curveballs at age 8.
Yeah, Greg Olson too, I think.
What's
Really
that?
young. Greg Olson, the reliever.
Probably so, yeah. Those guys had unbelievable curveballs.
Yeah.
I think, obviously, look, if you look at a kid, a kid who doesn't throw very well, and you're going to have to use your judgment on that. You don't want them to start trying to spin breaking balls, because what happens is kids try and manipulate those pitches. But I will say that throughout my time in professional baseball, it's been interesting, because I see a lot of guys that come into professional baseball, and if they can spin the baseball, oftentimes, they have a high spin curveball, it's a really good curveball or slider. Oftentimes they have a hard time throwing a changeup, because their brain just doesn't function thinking about, oh, I'm going to take spin and speed off this ball. Because when you throw a really good curveball or slider, you're still trying to throw it hard. It's like hitting a top spin forehand when you're playing ping pong, okay? When I try to crush a top spin forehand, I'm not trying to finesse it. I'm trying to kill it. So, but the flip side is I see guys who have really good changeups, and oftentimes they have a hard time spinning the ball. And a lot of times those are the guys that I'll say, when did you start throwing a changeup? Oh, I was 10, I was 11, 12. Did it come natural? Yeah. As soon as I put the grip on it, it was easy. So I think, again, you have to just kind of use your judgment and see, how coordinated is the kid? What kind of rhythm and timing do they have? And what kind of thrower are they? Okay, if they're a good thrower, like a Barry Zito, 8 may not be too early, okay? But certainly a changeup, look, I think a changeup is a fantastic pitch. You can start teaching a kid a changeup immediately.
And I guess some of them actually throw changeups because their hands are so small, they got to hold the ball with the whole hand. They're constantly throwing changeups in some ways.
Exactly.
So, all right, Paul. Hey, an hour and 24 minutes, almost 30 minutes, man. I got to thank you. That was outstanding.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for
throwing all the time.
Thank you for being ISG coach who travels around the world. Has been the places for us, along with Brett Strom, Terry Ayers, and some others. I want to thank you. I just want to thank you live on the show. And folks, thanks for joining us today during your busy day. I'm sure you have stuff during the day that you have to do also. The evenings seem to be a little bit better sometimes. But thanks for joining our show. Thanks for joining us on Facebook. Don't forget, this is a show that loves to challenge the status quo and invite some of the top baseball minds in the game. Thank you to Brian Crocker, our producer. Thank you to Paul Davis. Thank you to everybody. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. Tomorrow, we will have Reggie Smith, big-time coach with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Fantastic hitting guy, outstanding. Been with him all over the world. That'll be at 1 p.m. Central. Again, Reggie Smith, coach with the Los Angeles Dodgers, played there, all-star. Again, I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.